Okay, just first about it's a nice video, and we can just see some kind of the very interesting using scenarios there, and we can find some kind of the very significant improvement or upgrade on base of the latest version, last version which you launched last year. So I know recently you just launched the V2 of that. So just could you just briefly introduce some more about the details, the technical details, and experience details on how the V2 upgraded the user experience for the motion now? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first version of our tracking, which was in the device that we shipped almost a year ago on July 22nd of last year, that was the only technology in the world that could track multiple fingers in space. So we could track 10 of your fingers, and you could use your hands to interact with your computer. But the device could only track what it could see. So if you tried to lock your hands together, or if you turned them sideways, it would see your hand, but it wouldn't see all the fingers. And with V2, the results of about 2 years of research on our part about how to keep the same accuracy and very, very low latency that we had with V1, but be able to track the hands and all of the fingers, even when the fingers are invisible to the cameras. And that's what we're able to do with V2, which we announced going into beta about a month ago. And because Leap is software more than hardware, even though there's a physical device, we're able to push updates like this to all of our users for free. And this is just the first of many big improvements and updates to the software that we'll be pushing out.
Okay, that'll be great. So, just when people are talking about this kind of the user experience or talking about lip motion, and always there's several words will just come up to the mind, like gesture, hands, fingers, or this kind of thing. So, we see a lot of this kind of the press coverage, and when they describe about lip motion, and they always say, okay, there's gesture tracking company lip motion, or this kind of things, or the gesture tracking hardware company lip motion. Yeah. So, do you agree with this kind of the description, or we have to say in your vision, what exactly lip motion is?
Yeah, it's a great question, and whenever new technology comes along, people have to explain it in terms of things they already know or understand. Yeah. So for Leap, that's often either the word gesture or things like Minority Report or things that people sort of draw from science fiction. In our mind, gesture control is about recognizing a binary action, like when I swipe left, close the window, and then doing it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't fundamentally increase the bandwidth between me and my computer because it is the same as using a keyboard shortcut. It's no different than saying when I push the X button, close the window. And the goal of Leap has always been, how can we increase the bandwidth between people and their computers so that interacting with a computer can have the same sort of power and richness and accessibility that interacting with the physical world has. And how can we sort of move beyond the fact that even though everyone in this room has a computer in their pocket that's more powerful than a supercomputer was 15 years ago, the ways you interact with your computers are still incredibly elementary and completely binary. Left click, not left click. Touch, not touch. And that pales in comparison to grabbing, pulling, sculpting a piece of clay with your hands and fingers. And a lot of those things are just impossible. So we think of that as motion control. And for us, it's about solving a very different set of problems.
Okay, great. And you just said something that's really raised my curiosity. It's about this kind of the human-computer interaction, how you can interact with the computer, not just only touch, click, input, but also this kind of the sculpt, pull, or this kind of thing. So, it's so hard for a computer to replicate this kind of the motions for people, the motions of the fingers or the bodies, or even this kind of the bones, right? So, if now ultimately the computer can recognize this, can replicate this, can interact with people's behaviors and people's motions. So how it get computer itself more smarter? Or do you think and Leap Motion just can get computer itself to be more smarter, or can upgrade this kind of the computers, no matter it is a laptop or it's a computer or it's a tablet PC, to get more smarter? How you contribute on that? Yeah.
Yeah, and for us, it's very much this idea that what's missing from computers today isn't power necessarily, because they are almost mind-bogglingly powerful, but a way to communicate with them that's richer. And today, a lot of things that people do on computers, like creating a 3D model, interacting with 3D content, use drop-down menus and keyboard shortcuts, and there's a big manual, and it takes people months or even years to learn how to really use the software. And all of that are ways of trying to deal with the fact that the input is so elementary and simplistic and binary. And that comes at the cost of accessibility. But if someone can just walk up and put their hands and fingers in, and they can mold a piece of clay, interact with a 3D object that way, then a 5-year-old can do something with the same power as that 30-year-old professional 3D modeler engineer. And it's about taking advantage of the sort of magical and incredible evolutionary ability that we have to use our hands and fingers. Because every day, thousands of times a day, we do things like pick up a glass, pick up a bottle, turn a doorknob. These are very, very complex actions in terms of all of the muscles that have to be coordinated to do them. But I am able to do those things thousands of times a day, and I'm successful 100% of the time, or almost 100% of the time. And that is because we've evolved an ability, and we're trying to take advantage of that, of those thousands of years of evolution, and let people use it to interact with computers in a very rich way, like they interact with the physical world.
Yeah, great. So it's just something about the question about the 3D models, or this kind of 3D using scenarios. So how do you think about to work with the kind of the partners like Oculus? Because I've heard some kind of guys tell me, and they try to make something together with Oculus and Leap Motion, or this kind of things, and on game around this kind of things. So have you touched with Oculus on, or Oculus VR on discussing with this kind of the details, or this kind of thing, or other sort of the virtual reality service providers?
Yeah, you know, we very much view Leap as being about all computers in the broadest sense of the word. So today we have obviously started with PCs, and that the Leap Motion controller peripheral that we're selling in stores right now is obviously for PCs. But success for us is actually seeing the controller, seeing our own hardware disappear as the technology gets embedded in other people's devices, because that's just a better experience for the end user. So the first step in that direction was our partnership with HP, which we announced about a year ago. And today, Leap Motion is embedded in 13 HP SKUs, some laptops, some all-in-ones and desktops. And now we are starting to look past the PC to new opportunities and new form factors. And those range from sort of conventional things like mobile, automotive, TV, to more emerging form factors like virtual reality. And we are very, very interested in virtual reality as a category. And I think any opportunity where new form factors of computing are being created in real time and can be adapted to Leap as an input device is going to be a better experience than adapting old legacy things to a new input device like Leap. And obviously, anytime you can combine 3D visuals with 3D interaction, you can have a much, much richer experience and truly move to a point where it doesn't feel like there's an interface.
Great. As we just talked about the past PC or the post-PC areas, because we know now everybody's smartphone is sort of like this kind of the computing hub of your own, right? This kind of things. So now we see a couple of days ago, a Higher phone launched by Amazon, right? So it has 6 cameras. and with this kind of full 3D function supporting on this kind of thing. So in your perspective or in your understanding, how the smartphone could be so that Leap Motion can work with them? Probably now is not the right timing, but imagine how the smartphones will be. So at one turning point or at one timing and one turning point so that Leap Motion can now work with them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest things holding back mobile today is that the input is limited to these binary touches on a very small screen. And I think that is why a lot of people have a sense that innovation has slowed in terms of mobile applications. And I'm not going to say all, because that would be silly, but many permutations of possible applications that can be built by touching the tiny screen have been built. It's definitely, again, not about the power, because the processor in your phone is incredibly powerful and getting more powerful every year. Yep. But if you can have new input, if suddenly that screen can be a lot bigger, the interaction space can be a lot bigger, and it can be 3D, and it can be physical, so you're pulling out a phone and you're playing a musical instrument that requires a bigger space. You're picking up objects and moving them somewhere else. You're sculpting a piece of clay in space above it. All of those are really rich experiences that developers can have access to with technology like Leap embedded in phones. And I think what we're starting to see, even though it's very early, with things like the Amazon Fire Phone, are sort of complementary advances in mobile, moving towards a 3D display, although very slowly and very incrementally. All of that is helpful, but I think even for a traditional 2D phone, new input is very critical. And I think that Leap can provide a great experience for customers and a lot of options for developers that are frustrated by the intrinsic limitations of developing for mobile today.
Okay, great. Okay, let's just come back to talk about some kind of the very specific cases, because we know currently actually Leap Motion has some kind of very interesting use cases. The first one is about now we know the SpaceX, founded by Elon Musk, is now using Leap Motion for some kind of the 3D model construction. So how this cooperation happened, who found whom?
Yeah, one of the things that continues to inspire and surprise us are the number of developers all over the world that are using the technology to do really interesting things and solve problems that we wouldn't have anticipated. And I think that, and that group numbers well over 100,000 today, and they're in 150 plus countries all over the world. And they include people like SpaceX trying to use Leap to better interact with and better design rocket parts. And they include companies like Motion Savvy, which are building sign language translation with Leap. They include companies working on letting surgeons in the operating room interact with 3D medical images without taking their gloves off and having to sort of scrub out, which saves many tens of minutes of the patient being open under anesthesia, which has a real impact on patient outcomes. So there are, and some of those things we thought could be interesting, but there are, one of the things that I think is great about fundamental new technologies and platforms is often the most exciting things are somewhat unexpected. And there are people who are incredibly passionate and very talented who want to solve a problem, and they can use it to solve a problem that if we ourselves were just building everything, we'd never have the time or resources to pursue.
Okay, great. Could you just tell me more, sort of like different categories on how Leap Motion can contribute on that to make something happen in terms of this kind of the development? Like in game, and we see as obvious, we see a lot of this kind of the videos, and the game obviously is a key category. But besides game, what other industries or categories that can use Leap Motion to maximize the effort of development?
Yeah, I'm a little biased, but I think it's almost all industries and almost all applications, and I think that the first area that we've sort of focused on, and one of the things that we're personally passionate about, is this idea of democratizing creation on computers and taking something like creating things in 3D on a computer from boring professional work to something that's accessible to that 5-year-old, something that's accessible to a grandma in Iowa, by making it about mirroring the physical world and what these people already know how to do with Play-Doh and clay in real life. But absolutely many applications in terms of games. You can imagine things like first-person shooters. The melee mode today is push the button, oh, my character threw a punch, which is very boring. Imagine it being based on how you actually punch, how much power there is, what the angle of the punch is, grabbing objects and throwing them at things, or more user-driven content-based games where the user is manipulating the world around them and interacting with it. Education, absolutely. People learning to play musical instruments with their hands and fingers, learning by dissecting an animal and putting it back together again. Certainly engineers and 3D modelers, like the SpaceX example. And also, again, lots of amazing uses in industry, like the surgeons and the sign language translation. And in terms of industries and spaces, again, really anywhere that there's a computer. So we're very interested in automotive, people interacting with a heads-up display or a rear seat entertainment system, using movements. Very interested in the TV and how to turn the TV from a boring passive experience with a remote control, which is awful, into a great experience. So anything that has a computer, we want to have a role.
Anything in the computer you want to roll, that's great. So just talk something about the developers and developer relations and how you just strengthen the developers' relations. So just how many of you guys now once tried Leap Motion's devices? Just raise up your hand. Not so many, 1/3, right? So how many of you guys now already has a Leap Motion on your own, of your own? How many of you are developers actually? So many developers. How many of you try to develop something for Leap Motion by taking a long view? One? One more? Okay. So just tell me something about how you can attract this kind of the developers. Now, and they're working on Android, they're working on iOS, and they're working on different kind of things. But how they can be a part of the Leap Motion's ecosystem by taking a long view in terms of the policies, in terms of how you get rewards to them, or these kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we really value developers a lot, both as people who can build apps to make the consumer experience better, but also as an end user sort of unto themselves. And there are lots of interesting things happening with the maker demographic. For us, it's about making sure that it is as easy as possible to develop. And that's obviously a constant ongoing goal for us. And I would say with V1, it was fairly easy to develop, but still challenging. With V2, the goal is to make it much easier because you don't have to think about what to do when fingers are lost as the user sort of moves through occluded positions. But for us, the things we can do to reduce the time it takes to developer and the resources it takes to developer are things like making it very easy and integrating into engines like Unity and Unreal, having as many tools and bindings, both things we officially produce, but also things that the community produces. Yeah. But I think the reason developers are attracted to the platform in the short term is less about financial gain and more about the opportunity to be a part of building something that's really unique and pushing the boundaries of whatever field they're focused on. And these days, there aren't that many chances to do that with computers. If you're building a new game today for the PC and it's a first-person shooter, a lot of the concepts are pretty well understood and pretty well established. And that's not to say it's easy. It takes an incredible amount of talent. But when you're figuring it out with Leap, none of them are. So for some people, that's a terrible thing. And it's very easy to make mistakes. And it's very easy to build bad things. But you're also sort of forging new ground and pushing the boundaries. And you get to feel like what I imagine the people that built some of the first-person shooters felt 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
Cool. I see that. So by taking long view, and today we talk about the hardware improvement upgrade, and we talk about the software. We talk about developer relation things. So just coming back to the question, like what Leap Motion is, and you just said, and Leap Motion is Leap is something software is more important than the hardware part. So I believe the software is the heart or the brain of Leap Motion. So by taking the long view, Leap Motion will Leap Motion be a software company or a platform company? Because in these two different concepts are fairly different. These two concepts are fairly different to the developers, to the users, as well as to other part of the ecosystem. So by taking the long view, will Leap Motion be a software company, or a software hardware integrated company, or just be a platform company?
Well, unfortunately, it's always going to be a little bit of all three. But I think that the answer may depend on the vertical and the market to some extent. So today, we very much view ourselves as both a software company and a platform company, and we obviously do make a device that we sell. But I think of ourselves as a software company in the sense that the tracking and the magic and the uniqueness of Leap is in software, and that's great because we can push updates quickly and often and for free, and that's very important because the approach we use to tracking motion is still very new and very nascent, and it gets better literally every week. And it will continue to get better every week for the next 5 years probably. So we want to be able to push out that at the pace of software, not at the pace of hardware. But also a platform in the sense that tracking isn't really useful to consumers. So we have to let people build actual content, actual applications, and ultimately it's the things people build that are the product.
Okay, great. Last question about, so far we know almost more than 50% of Leap Motion's devices are shipped to the overseas, outside the US, right? From Europe, from Japan, or from Asia, from other part of the world. So just try to identify some key markets in worldwide and you are pretty focused on, and tell us the reason why. For example, why is Europe, why is blah, blah, why is other part of the world? Yeah.
Yeah, so since launch, we are in 15 countries and about 5,000 storefronts globally. And I think the most important markets for us are absolutely parts of Europe. We're now in France and Germany, Austria, the UK, Australia. But the markets we've been focusing the most energy on lately are in Asia. And markets like Japan, South Korea, and especially China have huge opportunity for us. And I think in many ways are culturally even better suited than markets like the US because you have so many developers building so many interesting applications and so much content. There's a sort of love and passion for technology and innovation. You have a lot of young, urban, early adopters, which is very close to our demographic as well. So we're very, very interested in entering these markets and working with local partners and local developers to make sure that we have content that is being built that's culturally relevant and interesting and local.
Yeah, you mean the content and this kind of the using scenarios will be culturally relevant with Asia or with other part of the world. Great. So still, developer really matters on that. Great.
Absolutely. We're just the tools for developers to create things and a way for them to get distribution. But the product, the experience people have with it, that is all about interacting with things that other people build, that the developers build. So they're so critical.
Okay, great. Let's do one last question. Okay, for a company who's trying to set up a platform to attract developers, is a little bit more ambitious for a startup to trying to do this kind of things. So what's the future of Load Motion? Keep independency or to be acquired?
Well, we very much have always wanted to stay independent and grow. We're at the very, very beginning. This is a 10-year, maybe even a 15-year journey to change how people interact with computers. And the peripheral we have today and the PC are the very, 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 very starting point. And over the next 10 or 15 years, our technology will mature and it will get embedded into all of the conventional form factors that exist now, like TVs and cars and mobile. But we're most excited about the things that don't exist now, the form factors that no one's thought of yet, that might not be possible without new, different ways of interacting. And I think that this is a very exciting time. And from our perspective, almost all of the most exciting things are in front of us. So we definitely want to stay in an independent company for a long time.
For a long time. Great. Okay, thanks for this response. Great. Thanks for everyone. Okay.